Some researchers suggest that shyness and social anxiety lie on a continuum, with social anxiety disorder being a more extreme version of shyness, while others suggest that the conditions overlap, with shyness being broader and more diverse. Although social anxiety has considerable overlap with the construct of shyness, the exact relationship between the two has not been determined. In this video, I'll go into a detailed comparison of the two so you can learn the difference and overcome both. Hey, I'm Neil and I struggled with social anxiety for more than 2 decades. On this channel, every week, I'll be bringing you the best methods and strategies that I've used in my own life to feel more confident. First of all then, what is social anxiety disorder? So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health, or DSM as it's known as for short, which is the main guide for mental health providers in the US, defines social anxiety disorder in the following 7 bullet points. So the first one is that it's a persistent fear of one or more social situations in which a person fears that they may be negatively evaluated in some way, and they might fear that they're going to do something embarrassing or humiliating or show signs or symptoms that they're nervous in some way. And then exposure to these feared situations will inevitably lead to anxiety, which the individual would realise is excessive, and then they might even avoid the situations altogether or just endure them with a very high level of stress and anxiety. And then the avoidance of these situations and the anticipatory anxiety around them will interfere with that person's life in many ways, including things like social relationships, and they may just have a lot of distress about having this fear. The fear, anxiety and avoidance that people experience will typically last for 6 or more months, and it hasn't been caused by drugs or some form of medication or another type of mental disorder that hasn't actually been accounted for. And now we move on to shyness, which is actually not listed in the DSM because it's not considered to be a mental disorder, it's just a normal part of somebody's personality. The American Psychological Association says that shyness typically means that a person feels uncomfortable or on edge when they're in a social setting or around somebody that they don't know well. They then go on to say that they might feel uncomfortable in new social situations and they tend to worry about what other people think of them, and they may also experience some physical symptoms. They may also avoid social gatherings or meeting new people because these situations can feel quite overwhelming, although not everybody with shyness experiences it in the same way. Okay, so this is where things start to get a little bit weird because there's actually no single accepted definition for shyness, and it's actually quite a controversial topic within the psychology of personality, but it can be broken down into various components. These main components are cognitive, affective, and behavioural. So cognitive is being self-conscious and seeing the world from a negative point of view, and also believing that you lack social skills. And then affective is the subjective anxiety that you experience, and somatic, which is bodily reactions. And then behavioural is the avoidant and the inhibited behaviours that you might have. Shy people may not even experience all 3 of these components. They may only experience 1 or 2. It really just depends on the individual. After reading through dozens of research papers, it seems as though there's a scale called the Revised Cheek and Bust Scale, which has a list of about 13 criteria that are used to determine someone's level of shyness. The items used on this scale are: you may feel tense around people you don't know well, you might think that you're somewhat socially awkward, you don't find it difficult to ask other people for information, you may feel uncomfortable when you're at parties or other sorts of social gatherings, and when in a group of people, you have difficulty thinking of things to say. It doesn't take you long to overcome shyness in new situations. You find it hard to act naturally when you're around new people, and you feel intimidated by people in authority. You have no doubts about your own social competence. You have trouble looking at people in the eye. You feel inhibited in new social situations. And finally, you don't find it difficult to talk to strangers, and you have more trouble with members of the opposite sex. As you would expect with a typical scale, people would then rate themselves for each item on the list, and then the results get totaled up. Although with this scale, it's actually a bit weird because some of the items are the reverse of what you'd expect. So they had to take the opposite of the number that they put, which I don't know why they do that, but that's just the way they did it. It does seem to come down really to how you define shyness. So there are people that say that it should be restricted to the symptoms of anxiety and inhibited behaviour, But then there's other groups of people that say that that's too narrow and that it should include all three of the components mentioned, the cognitive, affective and behavioural. I used to think that social anxiety disorder was simply an extreme form of shyness, but apparently from what I've read and researched anyway, that isn't totally accurate. Some of the main differences between the two are that social anxiety is classed as a mental health condition, whereas shyness is simply defined as a personality trait. Typically, the main differences between the two are that shyness is simply a fear of negative social judgment, whereas social anxiety disorder is an overwhelming fear of humiliation in social situations. People with shyness tend to simply lack a bit of confidence in social situations, whereas those with social anxiety disorder may find even the most simple and everyday social situations very, very stressful. Those with shyness may find familiar people more comfortable to be around, but people with social anxiety disorder may avoid a lot of social situations altogether. In the general population, rates of shyness range from around 40 to 50%, and then rates of social anxiety disorder are between about 3 and 16%. In many of the scientific studies done on people with shyness and social anxiety disorder, the most commonly avoided social situations were conversations, public speaking, meetings, and things like going to parties. Shy people reported less avoidant behaviours and less impairment overall, and usually their symptoms would tend to disappear over time, whereas people with social anxiety disorder would usually require manual intervention, otherwise their symptoms would just persist. Interestingly, shy people and those with social anxiety disorder experience similar levels of anxiety during normal conversations, but it was public speaking that really set them apart. So those with social anxiety disorder had much higher levels of anxiety while they were delivering a speech. The main relationship between people who were shy and who had social anxiety disorder was mainly found in generalized social anxiety disorder, which just means those that have a lot of different social fears. There was little relationship between the two when it came down to more specific social fears. So say for instance the fear of public speaking, and you could have people that had a fear of public speaking and met the criteria for social anxiety disorder, but did not meet the criteria for being shy. The studies did show that the more shy you are, the more likely you are to develop social anxiety disorder, although there are people that are very shy that didn't actually meet the criteria for social anxiety disorder. They also showed that the presence of social anxiety disorder could be independent from shyness in some cases, because there was around 5% of young people that met the criteria for social anxiety disorder that did not fit the criteria for shyness. Weirdly, around a third of the highly shy people without social anxiety disorder reported having no social fears, which doesn't really fit the idea of the two being on a continuum, so with social anxiety disorder being a much more extreme version of shyness. One possible distinction between people with shyness and social anxiety disorder is that the shy population includes people that are not fearful of social situations and they prefer to just spend time alone instead, and they're more reserved. So these people would be low on something that scientists call sociability, which is an individual's desire to socialise, and it's been shown to be related to shyness but not unique from it. People who have high levels of sociability but also experience a lot of tension around other people and inhibition are a lot more vulnerable to developing social anxiety disorder because of this internal conflict that it creates. So people that are quite shy that also have high levels of sociability can then lead to develop social anxiety as a result of this. So it's this approach avoidance conflict that can be one of the main developmental reasons for social anxiety, and could be one of the reasons why some people who are shy develop social anxiety disorder and others do not. From what I've learnt in the past anyway, it seems like sociability is more like a trait to do with introversion rather than shyness, and they seem to be mixing the two together. Overall then, the idea that shyness is a broader construct and is associated with a number of different conditions is the one that seems to be the most supported by the scientific data. Shyness and social anxiety disorder are certainly related, but they're not exactly the same thing, and being shy can increase the odds of you actually developing full-blown social anxiety disorder, although the conditions themselves are not totally overlapping. The main point to remember though is that both shyness and social anxiety disorder are learned conditions, and both of them can be overcome. You do not have to have your life dictated by either of them, and the techniques to overcome them are quite similar. If you're only experiencing shyness anyway, it's less likely that you'd be seeking any kind of treatment because it's probably not going to be affecting your life as much. Whereas if you have social anxiety disorder, then it may well be affecting you a lot and you'll probably want to seek some sort of treatment for it. Anyway, so instead of just being sat here and trying to intellectualize the differences between shyness and social anxiety disorder, if you want to take big steps towards overcoming them, then I run weekly online group sessions where you can practice being confident in a safe environment and gently nudge yourself out of your comfort zone. I'll put the link down in the description. If you want to watch more, then click here to check out my latest video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this content valuable, then please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.